to, really ask the question, because it's daunting, but it's not insurmountable. And, remember that for the most part, everyone that you end up working with will have at some point been at the point where you are now. If that makes sense, right? So even though interviews may come across as challenging or difficult, you will find that that's just part of the process. They don't really dislike you. They just that's just part of the process. They try to see what you're made of. So with that, let's start with kind of the looking for jobs aspect of it. One of the things that many folks who are getting out of undergrad and grad school are kind of unaware of is, where should I look for a job? Like, if, depending on what kind of job I'm looking for, if I want to work for government, if I want to work for an international organization, what are some of the things I should do if I'm really looking to get into the right possible position that I want to go into? And so we talked about it a little bit in the last session when we talked about resumes. Like, you want to craft your resume to specifically tailor the job that you want, but then how do you find the job that you want? And I would actually go so far as to say, you want to not only be looking for the job that you want, but you want to be looking for the job that you want your next job to be, right? So that any job that you apply for and get into will give you the experience to get to that next level, right? And many people don't think about that, and that's how you hear people with these horror stories of, I got trapped in this job, and you're not really trapped, but you feel like you're trapped in a job because you're paying student loans or you're doing these other things, and that's because you didn't necessarily position yourself to be available to be hired in your next position. And that's not to say that you should be overly planning your life out, because I would say happy accidents are probably the best job that you'll ever get. But you want to make sure that you look at the job you want. So I want to be at point A right now, but in 5 years, I think I want to be at point B. And so that means you want to be looking at those jobs and seeing what the requirements are for those jobs, and figure out, like, whatever job you're looking for, how can I fill in the skills that I need to get that job? And that was something that one of my mentors told me a long time ago. He's like, look for the job that you definitely think you can't get, that you want, and then figure out how you can fill in the skills so that one day when that job or a job like that becomes available again, you're a viable candidate. And so let's start off with search engines. You guys are definitely benefiting from the fact that you are in a world where most things are digital. It's not just because of the pandemic. It has been kind of a digital search engine world for probably the last 10 years. Kim and I definitely did not experience that. You would definitely cold call people. You would send resumes out to 1,000 offices, and then maybe someone calls you back. That's not the case anymore. But the challenge that you guys are facing is, how do you rise to the top in a world where everyone has the ease of pushing a button and submitting their resume? And so first off, you want to see, what do I want to do? So for you guys, let's assume that everybody wants to go into natural resources. Before I even start applying for jobs, the first thing I'm going to do is make a list of all the types of organizations I would like to work for. This is your wish list. It's kind of like looking for graduate schools, or even when you were looking for undergrads. Look at your wish list of places that you would want to work, meaning organizations. Make that list. Then make a list of places that you would like to live, right? Because again, the world is vast and there's tons of jobs depending on where you want to work. And remember that there may be more jobs in areas that people don't want to work, like, people who decide to work in native communities, or people who like to work in remote communities. Many times there are a vast amount of jobs there because they just don't attract people who want to live in cities, right? And then your third thing is, look at the job for its growth potential. So I told you earlier on, you want to look at your next job. Sometimes the job that you get as your first job could be the job that you have as your second job, right? And you guys are already working in this new environment where people aren't wedded to jobs the way they were, again, when Kim and I were coming about. If you took a job, you that was going to be your career, hopefully, and you might end up in that job for 20 or 30 years, right? That is not the new reality of the job market now. If someone gets 2 to 5 years out of you in a job, that's great, even in the federal government, because the idea is that you're going to move on to gain more experience, right? So the first thing you do, going back to what I said, the first thing you do is make a list of organizations you want to work for before you even look at job titles, job descriptions, anything. Organization you think you want to work for, location, and rural or urban, right? So once you've done that, you have a map of, hey, these are the types of organizations I think I want to apply for, right? Then your second step after you've done that and you've ranked them, I would say always do ranking just to see, like it's kind of like when you rank graduate schools or undergraduates, like, oh, this is my top choice. This is my reach. This the place that I know I can get a job. Like, you may list Starbucks. Starbucks is the job you need to pay the bills right now, right? And then the job at, some corporation is your reach job, right? Or some job at an NGO is your reach job. Once you've done that, now you want to see what is the best way to apply for these organizational jobs. So some of the organizations that you may want to work for are pulling their jobs directly from their site. So you go on their site, I'll give you like the Nature Conservancy. You go there, it says open positions. And you'll click on the position tab, and it may tell you again the positions that they have open. And this is why I told you to make the list. And they'll say, what location do you want to work in? Now, not all organizations are like this. Some organizations just put out all the jobs and they'll just have 1,000 jobs and you have to sort through them to figure out where you're going to work. But many job portals for organizations now are like super advanced. And so you can sort them by where you want to work. So some people want to work in the DC area. You'll see all the jobs there in DC area, but you may be excluding yourself from other jobs. And then some organizations, like I said, will list all the jobs and you look through them. Once you figure out the organization you want to work for, the way that they apply, this is the challenging part. Do a fair assessment, a realistic assessment of what your skill level is. And I would say that that's probably the hardest part for new employees. Sometimes new employees overestimate their skill level in a way that there's like, yeah, I can't take this $20,000 or $30,000 a year job because I won't make enough money. I will tell you from experience, my first job out of graduate school. Now, mind you, Kayla and I were just talking about student debt and stuff like that. I think I had $60,000 in student debt when I came out of graduate school. My first job was making $750 a month, right? You're like, how did you take a job like that? Well, it was a fellowship, and I saw it as an opportunity, even though it was going to be a struggle. It was an opportunity to get my foot in the door to make more opportunities, if that makes sense, right? And that's not always possible or always viable, depending on what responsibilities you have in terms of school debt or other things, if you have family responsibilities. But sometimes the jobs that you look at that seem not so lucrative actually will be your avenue to getting into other opportunities. So let's go back to my $750 a month job. So I was a fellow working at the Society of American Foresters. Didn't pay well, but I had a lot of exposure. I was writing briefing papers for Congress. I was writing articles for their Journal of Forestry. I was interacting with congressional members. So I gained a lot of experience quickly. And you'll find that small organizations, I mean, that was not so small, but small organizations allow you to do a lot of things that will enhance your marketability and your what's the word? Let's just use marketability right now. I can't think, I just drew a blank, but your marketability to companies, right? And so from there, I wrote an article. I'll give you an example. I wrote an article. One article that I wrote, someone at the Forest Service saw that article and thought, hey, this might be a good person to come work for our staff. And they said, hey, come for an informational interview. From there, fast forward 27 years, I'm working for the Forest Service. So you never know, right? $750, I had to suck up for 6 months, and then I had a job that led to a career, right? So I say that to say that not all jobs that you see are going to be the jobs that you want your career bent on. And so you'd be surprised at the conversations I have with graduate students that I work with or people that I interact with. They're like, but the job that I want is to be the world savior of trees in the Amazon. Yeah, that's a process. That's a process. Doesn't matter how much you learn in school, like you may be the world's most learned on this tree ecology because you learned it in school, you sat with the professor who coined the terms. That doesn't trump having real world experience, right? Because there's a lot of things that go around the bubble of just working, right? When you're in work environments. And so I would say do a fair assessment of your skills. So remember, we have our list now. Look at the organization you want to work at and apply at the level that you think will provide you the most opportunities to advance. I'm going to pause right there just to see if you guys have any questions before I move on. That's for private organizations. For government, it's a little bit more challenging, right? We have this really nice website called USA Jobs. That's where it's like your government clearinghouse. The United Nations has a similar website where they have a clearinghouse for all of the UN jobs. I would tell you that that is probably the most daunting and difficult website to navigate, even though it's easy to use, if that makes sense. The reason that it's difficult to navigate is that you it's not very clear of what jobs are, and I'm going to say it. We're recording it, I'm going to say it. What jobs are real jobs and what jobs are jobs that are posted to provide internal advancement. Sometimes they will market the jobs and they'll say the jobs are internal only. But sometimes they do internal external because maybe they have an intern like Candler or like Maya that they want to help potentially advance. They still have to be competitive, but they want to help advance. And so in many ways, they already have in mind a candidate with the prerequisite skills. And since Maya and Candler have already been working in an organization, they're going to outcompete you because they already have experience in that job type doing that work. And so that's why I tell people the USA jobs route is challenging. But it is a good exercise in making sure that you are prepared to be available for jobs that are out there because it's going to make you go through the resume builder. It's going to make you go through the reference thing. It's going to make you upload your transcript because you've never scanned your transcript before. It's going to make you work on a cover letter depending on the jobs you apply for. And it also shows you the range of jobs that are out there. And again, remember we talked about making sure you know what your next job or what you think your next job is going to be so you can start building skills, right? So you'll get to see a lot of things like that. And you can also say with USA Jobs, which is nice about the search engine, is that there's so many jobs in government. So you can say in 10 years, I want to be a director of something. Well, you can do keyword searches and you can see all the director positions and you can see what are the unique skills that a director needs to have so that you're already working to build the skills that are going to help you be more successful in your job search because you want to be seen as desirable by the companies that want to hire you. The UN search engine is similar to USA Jobs. And again, same kind of thing. When you work for the UN, you're an international civil servant. When you work for the US government, you're a domestic civil servant. And so there's the same challenges and the same kind of biases that are built into the system. There are other opportunities that I would say for folks that are getting out of undergrad that you may want to do if you can afford to do this is that Peace Corps is another option, right? It is a job that is not as challenging to get, but when you finish your 2-year assignment, and some people do a little bit longer, you actually come out with a skill that makes you more desirable. The skills that you come out with that makes you more desirable. So you may be one of my good friends. He's a beekeeper working in Malawi or something like that. Well, nobody's really looking for beekeepers unless you're looking to work for a beekeeper. But the skills that he came out with is he came out with language skills, like he could speak the local language, and he could also speak Swahili. And he came out with overseas experience, which is something that many people aren't going to have. Because remember, we talked about this with resumes. If 1,000 people are applying for a job, how do you make yourself rise to the top? Now, we talked about gaming the system and making sure that you have the right keywords and stuff like that. That helps to a point. That helps you get past the algorithm. But when you have to get to the point where real people are looking at your resume, if Kim and I have to look at even 50 resumes, we're looking for the way that we can start weeding people out. We're not doing 50 interviews. I'm just going to tell you that up front. There's probably no organization on the planet that's going to do 50 interviews, right? You're trying to get to the point where you're doing 10 at the most, right? Kim, you would say 10 is a good number, but 5 really is your sweet spot. If you can do 5 interviews of your 5 top candidates, that's your sweet spot. So the Peace Corps is a great opportunity for people who are just going out of school, leaving school. The nice part about Peace Corps too is if you have federal loans, they can freeze your federal loans. And then you actually, I wasn't a Peace Corps volunteer. I actually was in the military, but Kim was a Peace Corps volunteer. But they give you a stipend when you're there. It's not much money, but you're getting experience. You're living in a village, or you may even be living in a town or a city. But you also get, I think they still do this, Kim, but did you guys get a lump sum payment when you guys left to come back to the US?
Yeah, it's a reinstatement payment, but it's really just enough to kind of get yourself into an apartment, maybe buy a car. It's like a couple $1,000. I'm not sure if that's changed over the last 20 years or so, though.
Yeah, I think it's similar. And but the thing that the biggest benefit that you get from the Peace Corps, so we talked about overseas experience, we talked about a language skill, you get that competitive points to be able to compete for federal. So it's almost like veteran points and it's almost like disability points. Again, we talked about how do you move through the system to make you more viable to other folks. And that is the points that you get coming back from Peace Corps gives you, I think, 2 years eligibility or 3 years eligibility where you can compete on a higher status than folks who would normally be applying for jobs. Because again, when you're looking for jobs, you want to look for every opportunity to rise, make your resume rise to the top, right? Veterans points do it. So if you've been in the military, Peace Corps points. I think they have a program with AmeriCorps. I've talked to you guys a little bit about the resource assistance program. If you do that for 6 months, you get direct hire authority, non-competitive for 2 years coming out of the program. So you're looking for ways to, no problem, Kendler, see you later. You're looking for ways to advantage yourself um, when you're applying for jobs. So make the list, look at organizations you want to work for, look at geographical location, and then marry that to your job search. Now, all that being said, you also want to make sure you put your resume out there in those kind of search engines, Indeed, and all of these other things that they have. Now, I caveat that by saying, beware of scams. I had an intern who worked for me last year. She put a resume in Indeed. She got someone who reached out to her. They hired her. And then they sent her a check and said, "Oh, take your salary out of this. We need you to put this in the bank and do something else." She did it and she lost $3,000. So you guys are in that weird space also where so you're like older folks and young folks are the ones who are probably most susceptible to the scams that are out there because older folks are like, I don't have time to listen and I'm scared that they're going to put me in jail. And young folks are like, oh, this looks like a great opportunity. I'm going to jump all over it. And so the scammers out there know that you guys are vulnerable. And so they exploit that vulnerability. So, like I said, this young lady, she cashed this check or she put it in her bank and it was a real check. It looked like a Citibank check. She put it in her bank, the bank accepted it. In the 2 days it took to clear, she sent the balance of the money off to wherever the guy said to send the money. 3 days later, the check came back and bounced. Her savings is wiped out. She just had graduated from undergrad. She lost $3,000 of her savings. And the bank is like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. You withdrew the money, you sent it off. So now you're responsible for the $3,000 check, and she got no salary. So just be aware that the search engines out there, like Indeed, Monster, all those places are good to put your resume in. But scammers also know that you're putting your resume in, and they will look for you to hire you, and you could get scammed. So you want to always, when you get a new job, you want to verify that the position is a real position. Do a Google search, make sure the organization has a physical location, make sure they have an email address that you can call back, make sure they have an HR department, things like that. And also try to talk to some other people who work at the company if you can. It sounds common sense, but it's not. When you're looking for a job and you're like, oh man, my loans are coming up, I have to pay $700 next month. You'll take any job that you can get. So, um, and then finally, just like I said, open yourself up and be flexible. Some of the jobs that don't seem like great jobs in the beginning, even if they're low paying or whatever, or they just seem like they're just not what you really wanted to do, end up being the most rewarding jobs, because you end up working with great people and you start building your networks. Because at the end of the day, your net worth is not how much money you have in the bank, it's the networks and the friendships that you build. I'm going to tell people that all the time. Your net worth is your network, right? Because the people that you meet today and the people that you work with today are the people that may be able to help you on a project that you're doing, or they may be able to help you find opportunities that you didn't know about. And so I would say never discount an opportunity to gain experience. And it's easy to say now because I'm so far removed from the loan debt that you guys are experiencing, but I can guarantee you, it sounds crushing and daunting. 10, 15 years down the road, you're not worrying about that. It all works out in the end. As long as you still persevere and you continue to work and things like that, it will all work out because life works out, right? So with that, I'm going to pause because we're going to switch to interview techniques. But those are the things I would say for looking for jobs. It's not as difficult as you think. It is difficult to find a job, but there are way more jobs out there looking for talented people than you realize. It's just that you have to manage your own expectations and also make yourself more desirable on paper than the next person, because you're competing against a lot of people. Questions? Yeah, go ahead, Whitney.
Um, I missed something that you said before. You talked about doing a fair, realistic assessment of your skill level, but after looking at like the three things to do, so the wish list, the two wish lists, and looking at job growth potential. You said something in between there. I forgot.
So your wish list, geographical area, and job growth potential. And then you want to do a realistic assessment of your skills. I mean, like a realistic assessment. Because I will guarantee you that most people who are newly coming into the workforce think they're worth more than they actually are. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Everyone's worth a lot of money or worth a lot of time or whatever. But your market value is low because your experience is low. You may have a lot of degrees, you may have a lot of book knowledge, but your experience is low and you don't have large networks. And that's what companies are buying into, right? Graduate schools are looking at your growth potential. Companies are buying into what you bring to the company. If that makes sense. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that answered my question. I wasn't sure if there was something else I missed because like I was taking notes and I just had a space there for because I missed like
I
you
don't I
yeah.
don't think you missed anything. I'm trying to think, assessing your skills and then looking at search engines, not getting scammed. That's a big one.
Mhm.
Don't get scammed. We don't want you to get scammed. Um, and looking at government websites, the government USA jobs or the UN website to look at your reach jobs, like jobs you can't get now, but how do you look to see what skills you're going to need to build to get to those jobs? So that's always important.
Okay.
And then maybe did you get the Peace Corps piece or doing something like AmeriCorps or something like
Oh
that?
yeah,
Did
I
you
have
do that?
the Peace Corps piece. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I
So
think
that's it.
maybe I think I got it down then. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions before we move to the next topic, which is interview techniques? Oh, go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, I was wondering, I guess like more in the government, if you had thoughts on reaching out to like the recruiter slash the HR person. Is it worth it?
It is worth it if you have clarifying questions. It is not typically the person that you're writing to. They could be the person who's designed the job, but a lot of times they're not the person who designed the job, or they're not the hiring manager. So you can find out more about the position. So like if there's something in the announcement that you need clarification on, you could write to them. But it's not like they can give you some type of competitive edge, if that makes sense. I do think it is worth, if there's a job you think you may want, like, so I'll give you an example. If there's a job that you may want 3 months from now because you're graduating and you see a job posted now and you know it's not going to be open, it is useful writing to the hiring manager to see if they can give you an informational interview about the department or the office or that unit. Because a lot of times when people post jobs, they may make opportunities for another job, especially if they know some good people are going to be coming online soon because they're graduating. They may make other opportunities available. It may not be the same type of job or a direct hire position, but it may be a paid position, like through the resource assistance program, things like that. So it is worth reaching out to them if you're speculating, but for the job that you're actually applying for, it's really only useful for clarification purposes. That makes sense. People have asked me too about informational interviews. What do I think about them? They are good. I think they work for some people. A lot of times hiring managers just don't have that. Like, I always like talking to folks, but I'll typically talk to you when I'm not hiring for positions. When I'm in the throes of hiring for a position, I don't have the bandwidth to do informational interviews, because remember, for most people, unless they work in HR, the hiring piece, being on hiring panels, is a duties as assigned. So like, again, I'm gonna use Kim as an example. If Kim is on a hiring panel with me, that's not her job. Her job is her job, which she still has to do, and she has to be on the hiring panel, which takes up X amount of hours to go through and interview X amount of people. So informational interviews are good when you're not in the active role of trying to apply for the position in that shop, if that makes sense. Other questions? Oh, go ahead, Whitney.
Can you explain a little bit more about an informational interview?
Yeah, so informational interview, way back when, in the early days of the internet, search engines and job sites were not a thing, right? So if I wanted to work for, let's say, Booz Allen Hamilton, I might reach out to the managing director of the department that I wanted to work in. So say it was Pacific Asia Business Development. And I would see, because on their website, because the internet was new, the website would list all of the people in the department, and they list their email address, and I would send an email to them and say, hi, my name is Gary Barrett, and I'm a student at XYZ, and I was wondering if you would be available for an information interview because I'd like to learn more about your department. Many people actually look favorably on that, and if they have the time, they'll do it. It used to be way more common than it is now, just because there's just way more people who have access to the internet, way more people who look for jobs. But back in the day, that was something that people did, and you can still do that. And I even encourage people to do that when they're looking at graduate programs. If you're looking to do a PhD or master's program, you do kind of an informational kind of session with a professor who works in the departments you want to be in, and it's nice, right? It gives you a unique perspective, because some places that you think are nice to work because the salary is nice or the job title sounds nice, you may not necessarily like the culture of the place. And one of the biggest things I tell people, if you get into a job and the job is the job you thought you wanted, but the culture is bad, it can skew your opinion of that job going forward. And that's not what you want, right? You want to make sure that you have a realistic understanding of the environment that you're going to get into. And so information interviews are good for that. Figure out what the culture is, like what are the expectations for work hours, things like that. That was a good segue into my next topic, which is looking at interviews and what are some of the things that I think are important for going into interviews. And the things that are important to look at for interviews, if you are newly out of school or if you have 30 years of experience, are pretty much the same, right? The biggest thing that I would say for folks who are trying to interview for jobs is you want to look professional. It sounds basic, and you would be surprised at how basic it's not. Um, Again, when everything was truly in person, I would say people took more time to think about what they were going to wear to the interview. But now that we're in this virtual world, we've been seeing more and more that people forget that they are actually in an interview setting, right? Because we're in a virtual world and we're casual. And so they may come to an interview with a t-shirt on, or they may come with a hoodie on. What I find is that the candidates who tend to stand out more to panels that I've been on in the last year for sure are the folks who really make the effort to dress like they're meeting me in person, right? It sounds funny and it sounds strange, but it just shows that they are, and it may be totally smoke and mirrors, but it gives the appearance that they're more prepared for the interview. And it's so funny. One of the interviews that we did recently, one of the people who was interviewing, he had a suit on, and he actually stood up to show us that he had on pants and shoes, which is kind of funny. We thought it was funny, but it puts you in that mindset. You know, when you dress for the job that you're interviewing for, and also one of my mentors always said, dress for the job you want, not the job that you have, right? Dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have. And so the fact that the person was really prepared for the interview, that was great. The beauty of the virtual environment is that it gives you the opportunity to be thoughtful about your answers when you're doing an interview. So rule or step number two, or pro tip number two, is never be afraid to ask the interviewer to repeat the question. The reason you want to do that, even if you heard the question right off, the reason you want to do that is it gives you an opportunity to collect your thoughts, to write the question down, but it also puts a natural pause before you have to start speaking. I think the tendency is for people to just, I ask you a question, Maya, what do you think about working here? And then you immediately jump in, right? We don't grade people, or we don't evaluate people on how quickly they answer responses, typically. That's just not a thing on any of the panels that I've ever been on, in any hiring panels, in the Forest Service, in the UN, in the private sector. It's never been a thing, how quickly you answer. So always ask even if you've heard the question, always ask the interviewer, can you please repeat the question? Because you may miss a piece if you just start to answer. And then pro tip number three, always have a notebook or a pad or paper that you can write some things that you've already written down in your notebook. So on one side, you may have your resume, and then you may already have a note section where you're already going to write down answers or keywords that you think they're going to ask you about. Like, what is your background in such and such and such, right? Because you want to have your thoughts collected in a way that all you need to do is be additive to the questions that you're being asked, if that makes sense, right? Oh, go ahead, Whitney.
Are you saying to have the notebook for notes, or for kind of like speculative questions?
Both. So your
Okay.
notebook. So normally you'd have like a notebook, or you could have a portfolio is good if you're in person. If you're at home, it's easier to put your resume to the side, and you can have a notebook where you're jotting down notes. One of the other techniques that I've seen somebody use recently is they had Post-it notes on their computer, right? So if I had Post-it notes on my computer, you couldn't see it. You only see my face because my camera is just like looking at me. And they had Post-it notes on their computer where they were like looking at the answer, or not answers, but they were looking at some of the things, their buzzwords about themselves. Because you know the questions that people are going to ask. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your strengths. Tell us about your weaknesses. Tell us about a time that you had a disagreement at work. Tell us about how you resolved that. Those are standard questions. It's not just Forest Service. 9 times out of 10, those are the questions they're going to ask you. Now, if you're trying to get a job for Google, they may ask you they have like strange questions that they ask, but that's just to really like see how quickly you think on your feet. And you should always expect maybe someone may ask you a question like a think on your feet kind of question. Again, those questions are more so to test your ability to respond under pressure. Maybe get the answer right, but respond under pressure. So always have a notebook. Always ask the person to repeat questions, and always look to have some of your key responses written down already, so that you don't stumble when they ask you about yourself, right? The next pro tip is to think about the questions that I just asked you. Think about, what are some things that if someone saw you who knew you, what would they think were your weaknesses? Because the biggest red flag that many people have when they're interviewing folks is when someone says, "Yeah, I have no weaknesses." We all have weaknesses. I have weaknesses, and I've been around for a long time. And, I would say that every one of us is a work in progress, right? We're trying to get to our best selves. And hopefully, by the time I get to somewhere later in my career, I'll get to the better version of myself, and I still will be a work in progress. So I'll have to get another job to become better, right? So you want to already identify your weaknesses. It's kind of like when you give references, you want to give the people who are going to talk about you in a way that's favorable, but you also don't want to give references to people who are not credible, right? Like, you want to give your bosses a reference unless you had a bad experience with your previous boss. You want to make sure that one of your professors is a reference, but you don't want to give, like, Maya, you have Candler, you have Whitney, and you have Daniel as your references. Like, those are your friends. Like, you know, pro tip number 4 is know that when people are doing reference checks, they may ask your references for references. Doesn't happen very often because the Forest Service is trying to get away from that. But I can tell you from experience, sometimes we'll call them and say, "Hey, Candler, can you tell me 2 other people who may know Maya?" And you'll email those 2 people. And so hopefully those people like you, Maya, because they may just trash you, and that's not good. So there's things that you want to think about. And then the other question that comes up fairly often is, you want to have a time that you've changed something, or you fixed something, or you've made a process better. You always have that in your hip pocket. They may not ask that question, but you can use that in the because the question that they're always going to ask you too, that I think annoys a lot of people, is like, "Do you have any other questions or comments?" Right? You can use that. Say, "Yeah, hey, I'd like to tell you guys just a bit about a time that I've helped to improve a process at school or at my previous job. Hey, at Starbucks, when I worked there, I was on the line and we were able to do this process, and it actually made us much more efficient. We were able to reduce our lines by 5%. That helps." And also with the question piece, you want to, when people ask you if you have any questions, it's ironic, but the most people would say they have no questions at the end. But you should always have a question. And the reason I say you should always have a question is it shows the panel that that is interviewing you, that you're invested in the process, right? So your question can be as simple as, "Hey, what do you think the timeline is for getting back to candidates?" You don't have to have more questions than that. You don't have to ask about, like their children or whatever, but you want to make sure that the panel knows that you're invested in the process. And then you finish out your interview by saying, "Please let me know if you need me to provide any follow-up information. I thank you very much for the interview. Thank you so much for your time." Even if you thought the people on the panel were horrible, it is hard. Let me tell you what it's hard to be. It is hard to be mean to people who are nice to you. It's hard. You have to be a special kind of nasty person to be mean to someone who's nice to you. And so even if you thought the interview went horribly, you want to thank the people who are on the panel, and you want to say, "Please let me know if you need me to follow up with anything." And then I would say 1 or 2 days after you've been interviewed, if you can, send either a thank you note to the people on the panel if you have the ability to do that, or if it's a company that you're applying to, you can send a thank you note in the mail or through email. Those follow-up things sometimes are the edge that gets you the job. And the reason I say that is, like, again, I'm going to use Whitney, Daniel, Candler, and Maya. Use you guys together. You guys all did well in the interview. It was awesome. You guys are knocking out the park. Your degrees, everything is similar. And so, but we only have one job. But Maya was the one who wrote back to us and said, "Thank you so much for interviewing us." Well, hey, she seems like she might fit better with our organization. She feels like, I think she'd fit in our culture. It is not a scientific thing. It is a kind of feeling in your bones thing, hiring. People think it's a process. I mean, like, yeah, they give you scores and stuff like that. But I would say hiring is probably one of the most subjective processes that are out there. Unless they have robots do it, it is still people at the end of the day hiring people. And so you need to know how to work within the system that's been set up to make sure that you're successful. With that, I'm going to open up for questions. Go ahead, Whitney.
For the thank you note, I was confused if there are two thank you notes or just one for what you were recommending. It like right at the end of the interview, like when you're talking to the person, and then 2 days later, or just like a follow-up email right after the interview.
You could do it right after the interview, or you can do it 2 days later. I think now with emails, it's a little bit quicker, so people do it right after the interview. Thank you very much. If you have the email addresses for the folks, that's what I was saying. If you have the email addresses for the folks, you should send it out immediately. Say, "Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Please let me know if you need anything else." Exactly the same thing you said at the end of the interview is exactly what you're going to put in it. You don't have to put any other things there. But it just kind of shows that you not only were invested in the process, but you appreciate the time that they spent to interview you. Because that, if you're getting interviewed 9 times out of 10, that means that you rose to the top and you beat out a whole bunch of people that didn't make it. Because remember, I told you, Kim and I are not trying to interview more than 10 people, 5 people at best. And you can even ask that question. So that's another question I should have said that you can ask as a very nice question. Say, can you tell me how many candidates? They won't tell you who the candidates are, but they may say, yeah, it's a pool of 3 people. Well, that's good to know, that there's a pool of 3 people, because if they call you back for a second round interview, which some companies do, then you know, like, hey, they were impressed with me, but maybe they need to know something more about my skills and abilities. And so now you're looking for things that you think are going to make you more desirable to the team that's hiring you. Vivian, welcome. It's good. Oh, Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, you did like a spring semester internship and now you've gone and applied through USA Jobs for a summer role. Are there any best practices for reaching out? Like, you're still employed with the organization, you were accepted, but are there any best practices one should do to reach out and see how the process is going, or anything they can do since they are internal to that organization?
Okay, I think I'm not understanding your question.
Yeah.
So you're already hired
Yes.
and you want to work through the summer?
Yeah. So if like you've done a spring term, but you applied to go to a summer term.
Yeah. So if you are working for your boss, you can ask your boss if there's an opportunity for you to continue employment. If you're looking for a different role in the organization, then I would reach out, especially if you're already in the organization. I would reach out to the team that you think you may want to work for to find out if there are any opportunities for them. And that kind of goes back to the informational interview piece. It is definitely easier when you're internal for people to make the time to talk to you, if that makes sense. Because in many ways, they feel like, well, this person knows our culture, they know the organization, there's less of a ramp up. So let me look and speak to Daniel because we may be able to find an opportunity for him on our team. Kim, any words of wisdom for these folks?
No, I think it's been a good conversation. I mean, I was in the Peace Corps. It sounds like Kara was in the Peace Corps as well. That's a good opportunity to pick up some skills. And it's not like you're going to get rich working for the Peace Corps, but you're going to get some skills you will never get here. You will never get any other way. And there's a good community of Peace Corps volunteers in this region and across the country that are either based by country or, you know, by the location you're in. Like there's a Northern Virginia Return Peace Corps group, DC, and then you can go by country and country. And we're going to have our 60th anniversary conference this September, which I've just re-engaged with the Return Peace Corps volunteers and we're helping to organize that conference. So, a really great community of folks that are interested in intercultural experiences.
Yeah, and the Peace Corps is like a mafia in some respects. Like if you go anywhere in the world, you will find a volunteer, a returned volunteer. And the nice part about
Only if
Peace
you're
Corps,
hanging out with cool people. If you don't hang out with cool people, you won't be finding volunteers.
that's true. That's true. And the other nice part about Peace Corps actually has real jobs as well. I shouldn't say real jobs. They have jobs that are paid regular positions. Because the volunteer jobs are real jobs. They just are volunteer jobs. But they have headquarters jobs, they have country director jobs, and they have mid-career jobs as well. So once you get into working, always think about working for Peace Corps, because Peace Corps has this unique practice of letting you work for them for 5 years and then you have to leave. So it's a good opportunity if you're looking for a regular employment, regular salary job. Once you get some experience, you can work in Peace Corps headquarters, and it's a nice opportunity to get 5 years of really unique experience working at the Peace Corps at a different level.
Well, I was just going to echo what you and Kim said about the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps for a little bit, and I'm in grad school now. And so to have come back and go to grad school and know that you have already a community there of people who are willing to open their arms and accept you is really great, no matter where you go. And a lot of the Peace Corps, the people that served with me with Peace Corps are now working in and around DC in positions for, for example, the EPA or other places like that. So it's a really good community to be a part of.
Yeah, no, Peace Corps is great. You'll find in DC is a very unique place. You'll find either former Peace Corps people, former military people, or former NGO people. And there's like this kind of weird, interaction, especially in your development agencies and your land management agencies. Peace Corps, NGO folks, and military folks just kind of come together, and it's great because they all bring different skills to the table, but the skills are complementary. If that makes sense. Oh, let's see. Vivian said a couple of things. One should learn to be a storyteller about your life during an interview. You want to make something stand out about you so that they remember you. Your life journey that contributed to your skill sets help you to tell your story. As far as summer and spring, unless you have a boss you don't want to be asked, it isn't bad to refer your current boss to the summer boss. Oh, yeah, that's right. So yeah, I mean, it's always, I rarely found bosses like, how people say, well, do you want to use your boss as a reference? I've rarely found bosses that will sandbag a person who used to work for them, unless you've had a really contentious relationship. And if you've had that contentious a relationship, you probably got fired. So you're probably not going to use that as a reference anyway. But most bosses are just not. I mean, it's funny. I've worked with some people that I don't necessarily care for, but I've never ever given anyone a poor reference when someone's called me. I might have not given the most flowery reference, but I would say, yeah, they were a good employee. They came to work on time. Like you can say things that don't undermine them without having to go overboard. So I would say you definitely want to use your boss as a reference as long as you haven't had a contentious relationship. Because the thing with that is, if I see a resume and you say, do not contact your old boss, I'm wondering why you don't want me to contact your old boss. Like, it could be your boss passed away, but I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering, I'm like, why does Daniel not want me to contact his old boss? Or why does he not want me to contact his last 3 bosses? That's really a red flag. So. Other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question, Gary.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of my bosses from a couple of years ago, it wasn't like a contentious relationship or anything like that. He just didn't know me at all. And he basically said, unless like you really need me to be a reference, I'd prefer it if you didn't. And I don't know if that's because he didn't, like he felt like he wasn't able to speak to my abilities or anything, or if he just didn't want to be a reference. Like, what would you do in that case if I had someone as a reference?
So, in that respect, if it's your immediate past boss, then I would have a conversation with that person and say, hey, you know, because you're my immediate past boss or my immediate past supervisor, if possible, I'd like to use you because that's what people are asking the immediate past supervisor. But if they're 3 supervisors away or 2 supervisors away, that you don't have to worry about. It's your last boss that typically people look at. And again, it's rare that people call bosses. They typically call references because your references are just easier. If you're in an organization, as Vivian alluded to, if you're in the same organization, then your boss, the person who's trying to hire you may reach out to your boss just because it's easy to like ping someone and say, hey, Vivian, can you tell me about Candler? And then she'll say, oh, he was great, or oh, he was okay. And her saying he was okay tells me maybe I don't want to hire him, but yeah, that's how you do that. So if he was 2 bosses ago, don't worry about it. You just don't even put the contact information. It'll say, yeah, you can contact my last supervisor. So that's easy.
Not a question, Gary, but a comment. You'd ask Kim about some words of wisdom. And when we get back to in-person interviews, you know, the Forest Service does a lot of recruiting at meetings, the Society of American Foresters, the Wildlife Society, things like that. And if you've got an interview scheduled, you need to remember the interview is never over as long as you're at that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the interviewer sees you doing something rude or obnoxious, that is going to register in their brain and they're going to say, that person doesn't fit our culture. We don't need that. So that's the thing to remember. Even though your interview is technically over, it's not over till you go home and you're out of their sight.
That is a good
Yeah.
point. That is a great point, especially in this environment, this Zoom/Teams environment. People forget that they're still on camera. They haven't hung up yet. And then it's just like, people are like, wait, did they not know that their camera's still on? So Dennis raises a good point. You want to make sure that until you're out of their sight, you are always being interviewed. Oh, Kim raises a great point. Social media posts, as you guys saw with Neera, I forgot Neera's last name, but she was a nominee for the Biden administration, and she did not get the job because of, Neera Tanden, stuff that she posted. Now, I don't have any feelings on one way or the other if she should have posted or not. And should it be counted? I don't have any opinion on that either. But remember that people are people, and you're dealing with humans, and humans can be biased for the smallest things. So you want to make sure I would say if you're going to interview for jobs and you're applying for jobs, this is a great time to scrub your internet, social media preference or presence. If there's things that you think might be contentious, just delete it. Now, there is a digital footprint. People might be able to find it, but the likelihood is if you delete it and you're not famous yet, nobody's ever going to find it. It's only once you become famous that people start taking screenshots. Like, I'm probably not taking screenshots of Carl's stuff. I mean, I'm just not, because she's not famous. But when she's famous, people are taking screenshots. And that's why people can bring up stuff from when you were like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So just be mindful that, and I'm actually happy that I grew up in a generation that didn't have that, because I probably would just never get hired because of some of the things I say, probably reckless in person. But be really careful about your digital footprint, because your digital footprint does follow you. And the first thing I do a lot of times when I'm interacting with folks, especially in the Forest Service, is I look them up on the internet. I try to figure out where they are, where they fall in the organization. And so people will look you up. I look at their LinkedIn. It's just kind of force of habit now. And so just remember that people will look at all of your kind of socials, even your Instagram, or you think you're on TikTok or whatever. They look at that stuff. Oh, Vivian said, eye contact is important and is cultural. It may not be easy from some ethnic groups, but learn to have the ability to look into the camera and smile, stay calm. And while you may feel this is the most important thing in your life, remember that the interview is just another way for people to see you and like you. Interviews are indeed to see how well you fit. That is important. That is important. And remember, at the end of the day, don't sweat the small stuff. You will make it to the next level. You will make it to, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road. You're already on the right path. You're in school. You're doing the things that you need to do. You will get there. And so don't stress about it. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You will get there. So Anyway, with that, thank you guys very much. Thank you everyone for coming today. Vivian, it's good to see you. Listen, we need to catch up. So I know we got to get your stuff fixed. But thank you guys, and I will catch you, I think, next week or the week after. We'll figure out, but we're doing more enrichment stuff. So we're gonna keep doing stuff every 2 weeks. You guys take care and have a nice week.